So thank you very, very much for inviting me.
Oh, thank you for coming.
It's a real pleasure. It's cold out there. Absolutely cold out there.
It's cold as in Scotland.
So you already know I'm Scottish, so I'm just warning you. So just as long as you know that I have an accent. I was actually, when I first moved to America, which was 8 years ago, I was giving a lecture in Manhattan. And at the front there were two very elderly gentlemen. And after I finished my talk, I heard one of them saying to the other, "The guy's brilliant." And his friend says, "Yeah, what did he say?" She says, "I haven't a clue, but he's brilliant." So apparently all you really need to do is have a foreign accent, and you're guaranteed that people are going to like you. Meanwhile, are you following me? Because I can talk like that if you'd prefer me to continue, okay? Okay. So first of all, again, now that you are understanding me, it's a real pleasure to be with you. I want to tell you, I'm not sure, looking around here, I see there's a broad mixture of where people are from, am I right? Are you all native New Yorkers?
No.
No? What are you?
Well, I'm a native New Yorker.
You're a native New Yorker, but you're not.
Budapest.
Budapest, Hungary! And my wife's family from Budapest. Oh, she'll be so excited. Where are you from?
South Africa.
Lekker is a cricket, man. Where in South Africa are you from?
Cape Town.
Cape Town. Ach man, Table Mountain.
Yeah.
Oh, Claremont. Fantastic. Ach yeah. Where else is everybody else from? So you've all got accents, really. Okay, fine. Where are you from?
El Salvador.
El Salvador. Oh, fantastico. All right, so everybody's from different places, but we're all Jews. The important thing is we're all Jews. And that's really what I want to talk about. Because I remember many years ago, a very interesting thing happened. I had a very, very close friend. And this very close friend of mine was going to visit a country called what was then known as the USSR. Do you remember there was a country called the USSR?
Russia.
Yes, the USSR. Soviet Union. So my friend was going to the USSR, and there was a true story that just happened in Moscow that electrified the entire Russian Jewish, Moscow Jewish community. Anybody here from Russia? No? Okay, so you will know. Okay. You will know that the USSR, of course, being a communist country, then they had the children in elementary schools had to have a daily lesson in atheism. Communism, of course, is an atheistic belief system, and therefore the children had to have a daily lesson in atheism. This is a true story. So into an elementary school, into a group of 11-year-old kids, came a teacher one day, and she walks to the front of the class, and the children all stood up, and she arranged her papers for today's lesson. She tells them all to sit down, and she began her lecture. She said, "Children, today we are going to discuss God. Children, look around the classroom." So the children all start to look around the classroom. "What can you see? Can you see God? No. Therefore, God does not exist." And there was a little Jewish boy in this class, 11 years of age, and he leaps up and he said, "Children, look around the classroom. What can you see? Can you see the teacher's brain? No. Therefore, the teacher has no brain." Which in this case was probably true. I know where that little boy went on to graduate, which high school in Siberia, I'm not terribly sure. But there are certain sorts of Jews who are so proud about who and what they are, who and what their people are, that anybody who insults our beliefs, our people, just can't sit still. And when my friend was in Moscow having that experience, I was my first ever trip to the United States of America. And when I arrived, it was about this time of the year. I spent 3 days in New York, and then I was raising funds for a Jewish organization I was involved in. I had a week in Chicago and a week in Los Angeles. Now, it's my first time here in the States. I did not know that Chicago has a nickname, which of course is the Windy City. And I have to tell you, in January, yes, I'm glad I wasn't wearing my kilt. That's all I'm saying. The windy city is also the extremely freezing cold city, and when you put them both together. So I remember when I arrived there, in Telz, there's a big yeshiva there called Telz. And this large yeshiva, the week before I arrived, there had been a fight in the yeshiva. There's about 200 or so guys sitting learning Talmud, and suddenly the doors burst open, and in came about 30 or so skinheads. You familiar with skinheads? Yeah. Neo-Nazis, armed with baseball bats, who started to attack the boys in the yeshiva. So a half hour later, when the ambulances arrived to take the skinheads away, the police asked the rabbi who was in charge of the yeshiva, did he want to press charges? And he said yes, he wanted to press charges. And a week afterwards, he received in the mail a whole list of the names of the 30 guys, the 30 skinheads, who had attacked the boys in the yeshiva. So when he looked down the list, he noticed that one of the boys' names was Landau. Landau. Now, of course, if you're in where I come from, the UK, and you come across somebody with the name Landau, you immediately think Jew. But in the United States of America, as the song says, it ain't necessarily so. Because, as you know, I think, apart from black people who were brought here against their will, the largest immigrant group to the United States of America came from which country? Germany. Very well known, sir, yes. Germany. And Landau is a German Jewish name, but it's also a German name. And so it wasn't, it ain't necessarily so. However, it troubled him and one of the other rabbis enough that he and the other rabbi went to see the parents of this boy Landau. And guess what? He was a Jew. But his parents had never told him he was a Jew. So when his friends said, hey, let's go and beat up the Jews, he said, yeah, let's go and beat up the Jews. He was a Jew. So there are different types of Jews in the world. There are Jews who are so proud about being Jewish, what we are, what we stand for, our history, our peoplehood, that anybody who insults us, even an 11-year-old boy, will stand up there and challenge. And there are other Jews, tragically, horrifically, who don't even know that they are Jewish. And I suppose there is a group somewhere in the middle who sort of know what being Jewish is. Roughly, we're Jewish, but what it means, but it's not yet a passion. It's not something that burns in their heart fiercely. Somebody mentioned before, there was a young lady over there who mentioned before that she knew me through an organization called Gateways. Have you ever heard of an organization called Gateways? So Gateways is an organization which specializes in reaching out to Jews who don't have very much connection with their Jewish identity. And certainly back when I started working with them, which was about 15 years ago, they were working with from campuses to communities. And it was my first ever weekend working for Gateways. The fellow who was in charge of it is a fellow called Rabbi Sushard. He'd employed me. I was lecturing for 3 months. I was still based in Manchester in England, which is where we moved from. And basically, I was on my first tryout, my first weekend. They'd managed to get together. Now this is really quite remarkable. I do not know how they did this, but they managed to get together, if I remember rightly, something on the number of 300 or 400 Jews from across the tri-state area. And these Jews came from communities where they really were not like that little kid, not like the kid who knew nothing about being Jewish, but somewhere in between. But they didn't really know very much about being Jewish. They knew they were Jewish, and somehow or other they'd been persuaded to come and spend a weekend in a very nice hotel listening to various rabbis, including one with a Scottish accent. Anyway, so basically, after lecturing about 4 or 5 times, I had to give the farewell lecture. So it was a Sunday morning, they were all gathered there, and my new boss is sitting at the back. And so the lecture was going, I think, really quite well. And then I decided to do something a bit naughty. I decided to really be a little bit, live dangerously. And so I posed the following question to my audience. And you got the picture? A whole bunch of people, 400 or so, who really, they know they're Jewish, but that's it. They don't know what Judaism's all about, or being Jewish really means. So I asked them the following question. I said, tell me, what one character trait What one characteristic do you think that the Jewish people possess that makes us better than anybody else? Have you got the question? What one character trait do you think the Jewish people possess that makes us better than anybody else? What do you think the reactions of my 400 Jewish people who know almost nothing about being Jewish was to that question and that invitation? How do you think they reacted? Yeah, he's going, tuk, 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 tuk. You're nuts! Some people were so angry. Somebody said, I think that's racist. Somebody else said, we don't think we are better than anybody else. And somebody else said something else that people get. And then there was a guy, and his mother schleps him up and said, we're out of here. And I said, please forgive me. I'm Scottish. And they went, oh, that's okay. Apparently it's okay to be racist and not politically correct as long as you're not American. And then I carried on for another few minutes. And then I said, let me give you an example. I said, suppose you could give somebody from a third world country a green card to live to any first world country in the world. This was back, so this was 15 years ago. They could move to any country in the world. You're going to give them a green card. Which country do you think they'd want to move to? Every hand went up. I said, yes, America, they said. I said, why do you think that is? And the guy said, because of our can-do attitude. Somebody else said, whoa, it's my superpower. Sorry, I've never made a kid cry before. It's really, apart from my own kids, that's different. You can hire me, you know. Bring your superpower and scare our kids. Okay, meanwhile, back at this, somebody said our can-do attitude. Somebody else said our education system. So really? And then somebody else said our economy. Well, this was 15 years ago. And I said, this is really quite funny. 5 minutes ago I asked you what made you as Jews better than anybody else, and you were all appalled at the question. 5 minutes later I ask you what makes you better as Americans than everybody else, and every single person's got an answer. Why are you so proud about being Americans and so embarrassed about being Jews?
That's interesting.
Thank you. I'm not glad I came. I said, suppose you ask the exact same question to somebody from Scotland. Are you better than anybody else? Yes, we are absolutely convinced that we are better than anybody else. In fact, in Scotland we have a saying. Would you like to hear it in Scottish or in English?
English.
Okay, I'll do both then. Okay. So here it is in Scottish. Was like us. Gae few na ra did. I'll do that again. Was like us. Gae few na ra did. Which in English means, who's like us? Very few. And they're dead. In fact, if you ask a Scotsman, are you better than anybody else? We will give you an extremely long lecture on all the incredible achievements that the Scottish people have achieved. After all, who was it that invented the steam engine? A Scotsman. Who was it that invented antibiotics, penicillin? A Scotsman. Who was it that invented the road surface we drive our cars on? Tar macadam. A Scotsman. Who was it that invented the bicycle? A Scotsman. And it can go on and on. I'll keep you here for a long time. Or, I used to live in France. Ask a Frenchman, are you better than anybody else? Mais bien sûr, mais naturellement, okay? And they will give you, and I think they could lay claim fairly, to some real achievements and claims to achievements in the world of music. Think of Debussy and various other composers. Art, architecture, military retreats. I mean, the French are many examples, okay? Or how about the Germans? Do you remember the German national anthem? Deutschland über alles! Germany above everything! Or ask the Hungarians. Yeah, igen. Or ask or ask the Russians, or the Spanish, or the Italians, or the Greeks, or the South Africans. Anybody in the world, we're better than, except when it comes to Jews, and it's like, we're so embarrassed. How does that happen? It's a very interesting concept. It really is the story of Chanukah. Because when it came to Chanukah, we had our own beliefs. We had our own religion, our own culture, our own philosophy, and our own language. And then something remarkable happened to the world, something called Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great, who came from which country? Here's a trick question. Greece. No, Macedonia. He wasn't actually a Greek. So Alexander the Great came and he conquered most of the world as far as India. Remarkable achievements. And he was a great friend and admirer of the Jewish people. He sat and studied Talmud with a famous rabbi at the time of the Talmud called Shimon HaTzadik in the Beit HaMikdash. A great admirer of the Jewish people. And everything was fine. And along came a whole new culture which was wonderful and friendly and seductive. In fact, I often say in my shiurim, in my lectures, if you really hate Jews, you really hate Jews, and you want rid of them, be nice to them. And it's the cultures that have been most welcoming and friendly, including where I come from in Scotland, where there's almost no anti-Semitism at all. Just a few years ago I was invited to go home and address the Scottish Parliament. There's no anti-Semitism. Anti-Israel, of course, which is anti-Semitism by another name, but they'd be appalled if you told them they were anti-Semitic. Well, for the last 30 years, Scotland's has something like an 85% intermarriage rate. Because, of course, if the doors are wide open to our society to come and become like us, lots of Jews do take that invitation up. And along came the Greeks, and they came with a beautiful new philosophy and beautiful music and a whole new culture. And for many, many Jews, it was irresistible and profoundly seductive. And then what comes next in the story? What happens next in this story? It's a strange thing. You can see this repeating itself through history over again and again and again. We're welcomed into a society. We give a ton to that society. I remember seeing a picture in a book of the Kaiser, the German Kaiser, before the outbreak of the First World War, the largest empire, most powerful country in the world, before the First World War, which was which country? England. And the power from England came from what? The Navy. The British Navy. Britannia ruled the waves. And the Germans knew that to beat the British, they would have to beat them on the high seas. And they developed a new technology, a new weapon, a new military weapon. It was a ship. The ship was called a dreadnought. And there was a picture of the Kaiser walking in the shipyard with the owner of the shipyard who was building these great new vessels that were going to defeat the British. Guess what religion the man who owned the shipyard was? One of ours. 12,500 Jews died fighting for Germany during the First World War. 150,000 Jews died fighting for Austria, or the Austro-Hungarian Empire as it was during the First World War. And a very good friend of mine who's a rabbi from Germany said, had Hitler not been anti-Semitic, an equal number of Jews would have fought for Germany during the Second World War and died for unser Heimat, our homeland. We see a repeating pattern, and the Chanukah story is very much the prototype of that pattern. You get a culture that comes and welcomes the Jews into its midst, no resistance, everything is fine. And then when Alexander the Great died and his empire splits in three, then suddenly cold winds start to blow. The warm smile, the welcome disappears, and then there is oppression. Just like happened in Germany and just like happened in countless other exiles like that. And what happened next was, well, the Jews who were welcoming, or rather who had been welcomed, then they went over to becoming Greeks. We see this a lot today. And this is the saddest thing of all. That the Jews who bought into the alternative culture then become more anti-Semitic when those winds of cold winds start to blow than the non-Jewish people. And we certainly see it today in the United States of America. This is the first time on film, I think. I'm admitting I'm now an American citizen, by the way. So I'm Scottish and American. But you see it very much. And today, in America, in the political scene, in certain parts of a certain party, which I will not mention, anti-Semitism is really just like in England, in the Labour Party, very, very welcome indeed. And often led by Jews. A remarkable thing. So the Greeks change. Instead of welcoming the Jews are only welcome because there's two types of anti-Semitism. We've got two famous festivals, Chanukah and Purim. And we both say in our prayers, an extra prayer, Al Hanisid, for the miracles that happened to us during those particular festivals. And both were examples of anti-Semitism. The Purim story was a Hitler anti-Semitism. Kill the Jews completely. It doesn't matter if you're religious, you're not religious. If you're Sephardi, you're Ashkenazi, you're a Jew, you're dead. But the Chanukah story wasn't like that. The Chanukah story was, you're welcome as long as you buy into our beliefs, our culture. As long as you see the world through our eyes, not through your own eyes. And that's exactly what they did. And you'll probably know they passed all sorts of laws outlawing Jewish practice and Jewish belief. And give me any examples? Do you know any examples?
They banned circumcision.
They banned circumcision. Right? Why? Because in Greek culture, as we all know, the Olympic Games came from Greece. Only men competed in the games. Men competed naked. And if you were circumcised, then you didn't look like Greek. Do you know the Talmud says that men had themselves uncircumcised? Oh, it's, well, I won't get into details. You speak to the rabbi afterwards. I'll tell you later. In order to make themselves look, because they wanted more than anything else to be Greeks. What else did they ban? Oh, Rosh Chodesh, there's another hand there. Shabbos, they banned, and they banned, of course, what we are doing now. Learning Torah, talking Torah ideas was a prohibition. And then they banned keeping Shabbat. I think it was the famous English diarist Samuel Pepys who wrote, more than the Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews. They knew that that was the beating heart of the spirituality of the Jews. Get rid of that. But what were they trying to achieve by outlawing the announcement of Rosh Chodesh? In Jerusalem, if you can see the moon, when the Sanhedrin say that the new moon's been spotted, they announce this is the beginning of the Hebrew month. What were they trying to ban with that? Any ideas?
The whole Jewish calendar.
The whole Jewish calendar, the Jewish festivals. Somebody called Rabbi Dessler, in his wonderful work Mikta Melio, he says an incredibly interesting thing. He says, all the greatest... Do you ever see people spraying graffiti on the walls?
Sure.
You see that stuff? If I had to do a bit of graffiti, which I would never think of doing, my piece of graffito, is it graffito? Is that the singular? I'm not sure. My graffiti thing would be, God rules okay. Anybody who's tried to beat God, to take God on, it never succeeds. Says Rabbi Dessler, think of the first person who tried to do it. A guy called Pharaoh, remember that?
Yeah.
And Pharaoh is told somehow or other by people who apparently had the ability to see into the future, there's going to be a boy child born, and he's going to take the Jews out from Egypt to freedom. What was his reaction? Kill all the boys. Did you hear what I said? Kill all the boys. Not just the Jewish boy children, the non-Jewish boy children too. Why did he want to kill them? Why did he want to kill his own kids? Because these guys that could look into the future looked into the future and they saw a picture, a vision of the man who was going to save the Jews and liberate them. He looked like a Jew, but he was dressed like an Egyptian. So was he a Jew or was he an Egyptian? Wasn't sure. So kill all the boys. We'll not take any chances. But why was he dressed like an Egyptian? Did Pharaoh succeed?
No.
No, and he brought that boy up in his own palace as one of his own sons. That's why he was dressed like an Egyptian. Because he was going to bring him up. God rules okay. Or if you think of the Purim story. And the Purim story, Haman, the first Hitler, calculates the ideal date to kill all the Jews. And he throws lots, Purim, in order to calculate the best day using all sorts of mystical, magical attempts at power. Is he successful? Not only is he not successful, the day that he thought would be the most opportune day to kill the Jews killed the anti-Semites. The gallows which he built in order to kill Haman, or hang him on it, Haman to kill him, Haman is hanged on that very same gallows. God rules okay. And then in the Chanukah story, they tried to outlaw circumcision, so we wouldn't look different. They tried to get rid of Shabbos and learning Torah, so we would think different. And they tried to get rid of the announcing of Rosh Chodesh, so we wouldn't have any Jewish festivals, because the Jewish calendar is based on when the new moon begins. That's when you know in the middle of the month, the 14th, that's Pesach, etc. And was he successful? Not only was he not successful, he gave us a new festival, Chanukah. God rules okay. So ultimately, the truth is there to see, but people don't see it. People don't know why they're Jewish, don't know what Judaism is all about, but it's there to look at and there to discover. And the people who don't see it and who ally themselves to our enemies, sadly just disappear and lose the opportunity that we have of being part of the greatest story in the whole of human history. Our story, your story, the Torah story. So let's try and spread the word. When we know other Jews, and maybe they're the ones that don't know what being Jewish is all about, and the next time there's a Chanukah party, or maybe another Chanukah party here, maybe during this Chanukah, I'm not sure, bring them along. If there's a shir here and there's a talk, bring them along. Let them get a feel of what you already know. That the thing to be proudest of all is being a part of Klal Yisrael, being a part of the Jewish story. Thank you very much.